a lot of familiar faces, but just in case you don't know who I am, I'm Shannon Buccio, the golf manager at Broken Tee. Jeremiah Stumpf is our superintendent. This is Rick Phelps. We'll introduce him here in a little bit, but we're very excited to get this plan off and running. We're excited to share some of the improvements that have been recommended. So this is more or less a focus with Rick and his course improvements, but he thinks he'll probably 30, 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for question and answers. So I'm going to let Jeremiah introduce Rick briefly, and we'll get going once we get the okay about the recording.
Perfect. Thank you, Shannon. Yeah, like she said, I'm Jeremiah Stumpf. I'm the golf course superintendent. Been here about 2.5 years now at Broken Tee, and having a blast, and we're really excited to have Rick kind of help us take Broken Tee from where it's at now and keep making it better. We're excited to have some guidelines and have a plan for that. So Rick Phelps, my brief introduction for Rick is his dad actually designed the original 18 when it was Englewood Golf Course. Helped, I'm sure he'll tell the story, but he helped grade. He was, as a young boy, helped grade put hammer grading stakes into the ground and over on the back nine. So it's near and dear to him, and we're really excited to have him be a part of this. So Rick, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for having me out. It's always, these events are actually kind of fun for me because I get to talk about what I love, what I do. First thing I like to do though is ask you all a few questions just so I can get a feel for who I'm talking to. How many of you, is there anyone in the room, I guess, first of all, who's not a golfer? Sometimes we get folks in these meetings who are just curious citizens, interested citizens, what have you. Has anybody out in the audience played this golf course since it was opened by chance? We have a few. Okay, awesome. And so I'm assuming most of you are avid golfers. You're out there quite a bit. You know the golf course better than I do. Like Jeremiah mentioned, I started in this business officially in 1989, so this is my 36th year doing it now. But unofficially started in the business when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And this project we started, I was actually more involved in what is now the front nine, which was the back nine back then, the holes east of the river. And I'm almost embarrassed to admit some of the things that we had to wade through out there to pound grade stakes were some of the nastiest, most disgusting things you could ever imagine, because those of you who have played it since the beginning know that the east side used to be a landfill. And wading through piles of sludge and trash and old car bodies and refrigerators and things like that to pound grade stakes was pretty interesting back then. So I saw the West 9 built from a distance, was much more involved in what went on the east side. And my brother, who's also a golf course superintendent, was doing the same thing. So we would fight over who had to come out to Englewood and who got to go up to Grand Lake, because we were building the 9-hole addition up at Grand Lake at the same time. So it was always an arm wrestling match as to who got to go up to the mountains and who had to go to Englewood. So either way, it doesn't affect how I feel about the golf course. It's a great golf course. It's been a great golf course for a long time. The improvements that were done by the Dye family in the early 2000s, some good, some indifferent, I'm going to say. The one thing that it did do was it made the 18 holes radically different from each other. And we'll address that a little bit more. So again, my background, been around the business my whole life. I haven't played out at Englewood very much. I've probably only played that golf course 5 or 6 times in my life. So it was good to get back out there and spend a lot of time with Jeremiah and walking it. So basically, that gets me to what we did and what we're doing. We did about a year and a half ago, back in November of 2023, I went out and took inventory of the entire facility, all 27 holes, clubhouse surrounds, any open spaces here and there, nooks and crannies that I could learn about where we might be able to improve the facility as a whole. Whenever we go through a master planning process, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take a clean slate look at what is today and what could be for the next 50 years. It's been, I can't believe it, almost 50 years since that golf course was built. So what can we do with the golf course to keep it active, keep it vibrant, keep it effective for the next 50 years? As you all know, especially those that have played the game a long time, the game of golf has changed a lot in the last 20 years, let alone the last 50. So a lot of the key things that we were looking at out there revolved around bunker placement, hole lengths, tee dispersion. I'll get into all of this in a little bit more detail here in a minute. So we went through the process, went out and did the inventory, took a couple hundred photos, went back to the drawing board, so to speak, and drew up some ideas, sat back down with Jeremiah and Shannon and reviewed all of that, went back to the drawing board, revised a few things, added some things, took some things off, and came up with a master plan. Okay, what is that? Well, at this point, it's a guidebook and it's a budgeting tool and nothing more. It's not a construction drawing. Nothing's going to be built from this drawing. It's basically a tool for the leadership at the city to plan improvements over the next 5 to 15 years. Some of these things might never get done. They might all get done. A lot of it depends on finances. If the game of golf stays as popular as it's been since the onset of COVID, we're likely to be able to do almost all of the things on this plan. So keep playing golf. Keep everybody playing golf. So basically, to start with, it's pretty obvious for anybody, the people that play there regularly, or especially someone that comes in from the outside like me, to see that some of the bigger issues out at Broken Tee revolve around turf health, and I'll go into more detail there, the bunkers, the cart paths, the practice facilities, and the playability of the golf course. And that goes back to what I talked about with how the game has changed. So each one of those things. Turf health, most of the turf health issues are driven by terrible soil. It sits on a landfill. And even the west side, I don't think even Jeremiah knew this when I first started working, but one of my memories as a kid, and I'll see if I can zoom out to where we can see it, but the corner of the property up here where holes 15 and 16 sit, that used to be an old fly ash dump pit back in the 50s and 60s. And those of you that don't know what fly ash is, it's basically the remnants of the old coal-fired power plants. Xcel Energy had a huge power plant just east of here along the Platte River, and they used to dump their fly ash in that corner of the property back in the 50s and 60s. I remember seeing the scrapers, the big, huge earth-moving machines, go through there, and just clouds of gray dust would billow up. That stuff was like talcum powder, not very stable when it was wet. So that was a bad area of soil, and even though we removed it all, there were still remnants of it here and there, and you can still see the effects of that out there. Same thing then with the holes on what is now the front nine. The holes that are just east of the ponds were the main part of the landfill. So holes 1 and 2, 4, 3, the first few holes on the par 3 course, that's where the bulk of the landfill was. And so we struggle on those holes with drainage. We struggle with soil conditioning. And that affects the turf health. I mentioned drainage. Drainage is another issue. And you notice that more than anything on the die holes, because his design style created a lot of hollows that are meant to drain water to those inlets Well, if the ground is somewhat unstable and things settle over time, the inlets don't work anymore. And so one of the biggest things that Jeremiah and I've talked about, a lot of money and time needs to be invested over the next few years to go back into the existing drainage, one, and make sure that it still works. Some of those drain lines don't work anymore. They're collapsed or they're disengaged from one another. And two, add a significant amount of additional drain lines to get the water off of the golf course. The water itself, the water quality is not that great. So when we're dealing with terrible soils and we're pouring irrigation water on the top to try to keep the grass alive, sometimes we're compounding our own problems. So that's an issue. And honestly, the last 5 years, the amount of play is a problem. When you're packing 50 to 60,000 people out there constantly walking everywhere and driving everywhere, problem areas develop that are very difficult to address because we're trying to keep the golf course open all the time. There aren't enough work hours in the day, in the daylight, when we can go out and fix things that aren't compounded the next day when the next person drives through a damp spot. So that's the turf health item. The bunkers, we talked about a little bit, where we have radically different style of bunker design from the die holes to the Phelps holes. The goal in the master plan, as far as I'm concerned, is to ultimately arrive at a cohesive bunker style that's really kind of something in between the two that you've got there now. And I'm going to oversimplify the heck out of this, but just to get through it quickly, you think about the die style bunkers out there, they are flat sand with no sand flashed up on any side, so a lot of the bunkers are hard to see, and there are steep grass faces that bake in the Colorado sun and that are somewhat difficult to mow and maintain. To the old Phelps style, the 1970s Phelps style, which are gigantic bunkers that were designed to be easily maintained by the old school ride-on equipment, which isn't anywhere near as good as what we have today. And someone noted walking up here to me a minute ago, a lot of the bunkers are far removed from greens, so that there was room with big mowing equipment to mow between the bunker and the green. Well, we don't necessarily need to do that as much anymore. So there are things that we want to do, reducing the size of some of those bunkers, reshaping, deepening. Over the years, bunkers tend to grow a little bit because they're edged year after year after year, and they also tend to shallow up year after year because we dust them with an inch of new sand every so often to try to freshen them up. I would be willing to bet that, let's say, for example, those bunkers on number 10, I bet you there's 15 inches of sand in those bunkers. If we dig down, there's at least 15 inches of sand. The other thing that happens is on the play side, especially on green side bunkers, that play side lip gets built up and up and up and up over the years, because you imagine hundreds of sand shots that deposit a quarter of an inch or an eighth of an inch of sand each time. Those rims grow, and they can sometimes be a foot or 2 feet higher than the original design. So that kind of evolution happens all the time, and it's something that maintenance on those things gets deferred, gets kicked down the road, especially through the tough times. And we had a long stretch of tough time from 2007 to 2015-16 where a lot of projects got kicked down the road. And so now that's, again, the impetus behind the master plan is to try to catch back up a little bit and try to check some of those deferred projects off the list. Cart paths are another one, same kind of thing. We've got a lot of asphalt cart path out there that's not in very good shape, especially anywhere where we're in the trees, where tree roots, hole number 9 is a perfect example. The tree roots on the cart path on number 9 are terrible. Practice facilities was another one that I touched on. The practice facilities at Broken Tee are suffering from their popularity. And practice areas on public golf courses have become as popular or more popular than the golf courses that they sit next to. So we need to do what we can to try to revise what's there, improve what's there to handle the amount of traffic that it already gets, plus perhaps additional traffic that it might see if we if the improvements are really popular. And I'll get into a little bit more details on that when we look around the plan here in a minute. And then finally, the last thing is playability, and that's a big, broad topic, but basically what that means is maintaining the level of challenge for the better players as best we can, making the golf courses absolutely welcoming and fun and usable for beginning golfers and everybody in between. What that typically means for especially any golf course that's over about 30 years old is building more forward tees, sneaking in a few back tees where we can, to, especially at this altitude, to get as much length as we can, and having a good variety. I know you guys already use a 4 or 5 tee system with combo tees. I think that's great. We want to continue that, and try to give as much flexibility to the operations staff as we can to get people out and enjoying the golf course and using it at a level that's comfortable for their game. So again, I could stand up here for 4 hours and go over every single little thing on the plan. We don't have time for that, and watching it come down pretty good outside, I imagine people might be getting antsy to get on the road and get home here pretty soon. But I want to leave a lot of time for questions, so I'm going to buzz through the golf course plan itself fairly quickly, and then I'm happy to stick around and answer questions for as long as we want to. So basically what you see if you look at this plan, and I think this is probably the best version to look at, although I'm going to click on the east plan just to make it, now it's turned 90 degrees, which may or may not be a good idea, but basically anywhere on the plan where you see things colored are areas that we're doing something, we're making an improvement. So graphically, this is your driving range tee right here, and I'll show you a more detailed plan of the practice facilities in a second, but there's the driving range tee. Here's number 1 on the champ course and number 1 on the par 3. So you can see where we're building new tees, new back tee that gets rebuilt, new forward tee that gets built. And the blue color here is drainage. We're going to go into that entire drain line, add new basins where we need them, and add additional spurs and what are called French drains, which are perforated pipes with gravel to help get the water off of there so that we don't end up with the areas of mud and dead grass by midsummer every year. Another thing, just looking again, you can see the bunkering. I would say at least 80% of the bunkers in terms of their locations stay where they are. They slide a few yards here and there. Some of them shrink, some of them grow. There are a few that go away entirely. One that comes to mind right away is the little tiny one that's at the end of the pond here on number 6. If you can see right there where my cursor is, there's that little bunker that I think when it was originally designed was probably intended to be a beach bunker that looked like it was coming up out of the water. Well, the water in those 3 lakes is basically groundwater that matches the water level in the Platte River. So over the course of the summer, as the Platte River water starts to drop, the water in those lakes starts to drop. And that's one of the reasons why we have issues with pond bank stabilization in those ponds, because the water's never static. It never stays the same. It's constantly going up and down. You see the coloring, it's kind of a faint color, but we do have color around all 3 of those ponds, indicating that that is a pretty significant project that's on the master plan. We want to come into those lake edges, stabilize that soil so that we can lay the ground back a little bit, add either a geotech fabric or some sort of a stabilizing agent in there so that we have less erosion. The geese don't help with that. The water fluctuation doesn't help. And here in Colorado, we get wind erosion where the wind blows the waves usually it's against the eastern pond bank. And those are the ones where you first start to see that erosion happening. So there are some newer products out that they're fabrics that you fill with soil and cover with a thin coat of topsoil and then plant grasses into them, and they root through the fabric, and it forms a pretty strong and durable bank for your ponds that hopefully won't erode nearly as much or as quickly as these have. So other than that, you can see cart paths colored throughout. The plan eventually, at some point, will be to replace all cart paths across the entire golf course. That may not happen very quickly. It may not happen all at once. That's a big chunk of money. But there's some tree planting here and there in select locations. So the big projects are trees, bunkers, cart path, and drainage. And the tees, a lot of times we'll do tees while we're doing other projects, specifically bunkers, because bunker projects, even if you're not deepening the bunkers per se, generate dirt. By pulling out the old sand and by reshaping what's there, we always have extra dirt left over when we do a bunker project. So that's an ideal time and way to wrap some tee work into that project, because you already have the dirt on site. And it's an easy add for the contractor to go build a handful of tees with that dirt. So there are tee pads. Specific improvement areas, you can see we're not really changing the routing of any holes per se, especially on the main course. It's all basically just fixing what's there. Hole number 15 is probably the only one where we're really kind of moving a fairway, so to speak, and it's kind of hard to see on this. It's a little bit light, but you can see, let me pull up this other drawing just because it's a little easier to see. There. So now we're back to north is up. Sorry about the twist, but you can see we intentionally try to color over the top of the aerial photo so that you can see what exists underneath. Here's the cart path on the right side of that hole right now, and here's where it cuts across and goes back around behind the green. So you can see how much we're moving the fairway out to the right there, so that we don't have, one, it's already tight enough in here, we don't want to have to remove trees, and two, I think it adds kind of an interesting strategic element to this hole, because now I'm asking the long hitters whose tee stays roughly where it is right now. You can sort of see the outline of the existing main tee right there. We're moving the back tee back just a little bit, and then we're moving the other tee over to the right. Now I'm asking the longest hitters, hey, if you want to bomb it down there, you have to hit it over those trees. But I'm moving everybody else over to the right to try to take those trees more out of play. And I'm giving you more room on the right to hit a 200 to 240 yard tee shot down there on the right. We come into the second landing area then and reestablish a bunker where there used to be 3, I believe, back in the day. And then revise the bunkering around the green, push the cart path back as far as we can so it's out of sight and out of play. So that's kind of typical of some of the changes. I mean, that's probably a little more extensive. A lot more typical things are here, let's say on number 12, where you can see there's the existing fairway bunker on 12. Here's where it really ought to be in play for the longer hitters, barely reachable for the average player, but still in your mindset, okay? So there's a few of those out there where, again, today's technology, players are hitting the ball a lot farther than they ever did before. Some of the hazard values are not in the right place where we want them to be from a playability standpoint. Other than that, I mean, let me zoom in on the practice area just because that is a pretty extensive project that we have on the master plan. What you're looking at here then, starting at the range tee, is right now the range tee is on 3 levels, which is really inefficient in terms of maximizing the number of people that can use it at a time. So we're going to level out the top 2 tiers into 1 level, and that will become probably 30% bigger than it is right now in terms of the grass tee space, but then add a higher quality artificial mat surface at the back so that in this time of year, in the shoulder months when the grass isn't growing, we can put people on mats and keep the grass for the summer season when we really want it to be as good as possible. I'm showing a new building, that's this kind of salmon color here, that I think is going to become kind of the norm at golf courses over the next 30 years. That building will be an indoor-outdoor teaching facility building, where the north side of the building wall that you see right there will have enough room for, sorry, I'm having a hard time holding this mouse very still, but we'll have enough room for 5 hitting bays that have garage doors. You've probably seen this at some other courses around the Front Range area, where you can hit out of the building out to the driving range on days like today if you really wanted to, kind of a top golfy type of a scenario. The building ultimately would be designed so that a second story could be added if we're getting enough play and generating enough new revenue on the driving range, and you could have 10 hitting bays that would hit out onto the range. That building would also be big enough to have indoor simulators, a practice green, an artificial practice green, so that the teaching staff could have their own facility, kind of almost a standalone facility where they could do kids clinics and adult lessons and everything out of that building. Then moving on to the practice green area, again here, if I zoom in enough, you can almost, and I don't know if I can hold the mouse right, but right there, I'm tracing the outline of the existing putting green right there. And you can sort of see how much room we really have in there. We've got a lot of room in there to make, I think, what could be a really cool putting green. And it could be as simple as just a bigger practice green, or it could be what I've got shown here with these blue lines is an 18-hole putting course. So you could do something in between, some combination of those things. Again, it's a master plan at this point, and that's all the further we've taken it. Then we go over to the short game area, which to me is pretty good as it is now, but has the potential to be spectacular. The biggest drawback to it right now is this bunker right here was designed with the steep face facing due south, and that thing just gets cooked. There's no way, as good a superintendent as Jeremiah is, he's not going to be able to keep the grass alive on that slope. So one of the changes that you can see, I've moved the bunkers around to where we no longer have a south-facing slope on any of the bunkers. We've tweaked the greens a little bit, I think, to provide a little bit more variety in terms of the shots that you can hit there. This green right here is a long, skinny green that's ideal for practicing your bump and run shots. And then you've got a couple of shorter greens with a deep bunker over here and a shallower bunker up here, and some fairway area and some rough area, basically trying to create every situation that you might see out on the golf course in the short game area. Again, other than that, other than, some of the bunkers, improved target greens out in the hitting area, improved irrigation, improved turf grass conditions. That involves drainage. That involves a lot of seed work and sodding out there. Probably revising or replacing the lighting so that we can open it up and keep it open, until 10 or 11 at night on summer nights. Trying to just have this expand what service it already provides and have what's there even better than what's there now. So that's really kind of the 10,000 foot quick, walkthrough. I would be happy to look at any specific things, specific holes, answer questions. I'm here as long as you need me to be. We'll have you grab the microphone just because we are recording this for future use. So go ahead.
Okay, specific holes, number 3 and number 6.
Okay.
Is the drainage improvements going to help grass grow there? Or are you going to have to bring in topsoil to get the grass to grow on those holes?
Both. We need to do the drainage improvements, but as you can see in this area right here between 2 and 3, you've got that all the blue lines, and again, this is very conceptual. It was just a kind of a way for us to try to grasp a number so that we could put a cost estimate to it. And we have done a cost estimate, and I'll get to that in a minute. But you see the colored areas around it, that's kind of a minimum scope of where we would go in, remove some of the soil that's in there now. because it's hydrophobic, it's anaerobic, it's bad. Remove that, do the drainage, and put back in high-quality root zone mix or topsoil.
Well, I like to hear that. To remove what's bad and put in what's good.
Yeah.
Number 2 is shorter front tees on the back nine.
On, throughout, but particularly the back nine,
Yeah,
yes.
because everybody hits from the same tee box back there,
Yes,
no matter what.
and that's something I didn't really emphasize, but yes, and that, you can see here, like on number 11,
Yeah, number 11.
building actual tee boxes.
Yeah.
Not just putting markers out in the fairway.
Yeah.
And they won't be big, but they'll be big enough that we can mow and maintain them effectively and efficiently, and they'll be flat.
And my last is the lake between 13 and 14.
Okay?
That is one algae-filled, stinky, most smelliest thing you've ever smelled in the
So are
summer.
you're looking at,
It's got to be hazardous to us just to breathe it.
are you looking at this one or this one? That one? Okay,
Yeah, that one.
okay,
That one is so bad.
okay. And that's something.
And that needs to be fixed because it's just, you can't hardly stand to be near that lake at all. It's not, can't
Okay.
be healthy. And, people who come out here that haven't played here before and they have to go by that lake, they guess probably can't believe that it's that bad.
Yeah, so that one, that pond specifically, but also the ponds, some of the other ponds, I mean, water quality is an issue. It gets stinky on the front nine as well. We're going to invest about $20,000 this year into, we're going to put aerators in them, so the bubblers that'll help oxygenate the ponds. We're going to treat them as well with some biologicals. And then they're called high volume little fountains, but they're not like a pretty fountain. It's not going to shoot 20 feet up in the air, but it's made for moving the water and circulating it. So, the 2 irrigation ponds, so the one on number one, between 1 and 6, the first one between 12 or 13 T and 12 green, and then that one on 14. Those are going to be our main focus this year. So, yeah, I think we'll see a pretty major improvement in that this year. So, yeah.
So this is a master plan with millions of dollars staked out on different projects. I'm wondering, Jeremiah, if you could address what the priorities are in sort of stacking projects. What's going to happen first, second, third? How will that work?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So you got the card there, our website. So we're actually, we've branded this a better broken tee. And so there's on our website, it's going to be very specific. We actually have on there for 2025 what we're working on this year. But I can tell you we started some things last year with drainage. We purchased 71 catch basins to start rebuilding the ones that are out there right now. On the front nine, we added 7 catch basins to hole number 6 already. We did that this fall. That's going to help out a lot. Number 3, we added 2 catch basins, and then irrigation. We're going to start replacing the irrigation system on the east side of the river is 15 years old now, or a little over 15, and so we're going to start by replacing the heads around the greens first. And the heads on fairways 1 and 6, which are 2 of our worst fairways. So.
6 last
Yeah.
and it didn't work out very well.
We did. We put a lot of work into it, and it didn't take as well as we would have wanted it to. But we're throwing everything at it, and our team is. We're gonna make grass grow there. So we're gonna get there.
I had a quick question about the placement and how many cart paths there are.
A lot of the other courses I see in Denver don't have cart paths between the tee and the green. They just have them around the tees, around the greens, etc. I was wondering if that's possible at Broken Tee, or if it's due to the soil conditions that, cart paths are put in on every hole, along every hole, because I feel like some of them, thinking about 1, 2, between 3 and 4, 6, 9, they're all long hazards or penalty areas or out of bounds. And so they're even more penal than like hitting a cart path tradition.
Right.
So I was just curious about that.
That's a great question. I mean, that's something that as an architect, I wrestle with on every single project I work on. And I hate cart paths. I'm a walker myself, an avid walker. So it pains me to put cart paths wall to wall, but I also understand 100% from an operator's viewpoint that it drives additional revenue that pays bills, because you can play the golf course when it's cart path only. You can play much quicker after rains. It actually, on a course that's as busy as this one, it keeps the turf in better condition. You have issues again, and I'm not here to bash the die organization, but you have issues on the die style holes where you have to have cart path because of all of those dips and low spots would get rutted up with tire tracks, and they would be 10 times worse than they already are if we didn't have cart paths throughout there. So I get it. I think, we talked about it in the master planning process. There are certain holes out here, even though I show cart path throughout, there are certain holes where I would wait until the very, very last and make sure that you really need to do it before you do it. So I feel your pain.
Yeah, thanks. The sympathy is helpful.
Hi, I wondered if you could talk about just the par 3 in general. Is it some of the same types of improvements over there, or anything unique or special? I love the par 3 to death, so
Yeah.
it faces similar challenges.
Yeah, I mean, really, as much as anything, the par 3, I would say stays the same, but with the change in bunker style, it'll be a little bit easier to maintain. It might look a little softer than it does now, just because it's pretty rugged with the fescue banks and some of the steep slopes here and there. There aren't really any big changes. I mean, the biggest one might be some tee work, trying to spread out the wear. Any place where the tees are even a little bit too small and they get beat up with all the play that it gets, we want to expand those tees a little bit for turf health. We are showing one bunker being removed on, and I don't know the whole numbers well enough. I think that's number 7, isn't it? Up here in the corner, that little pot bunker that's kind of in front, either 6 or 7. Talked about removing that one just because that green surface is really hard to hit and hold for the average player. So by removing that bunker and creating a little tongue of fairway down where that low area is now, it would give a low ball hitter a chance to land it there and stop the ball going after a back right hole location. Other than that, a little bit of tree planting again for screening. Like on number 8 here, you can see some trees being planted behind the green. And that's pretty much it. Tweaking a few little mow patterns here and there, softening a few slopes where, again, in our south facing, this time of year when we go periods without snow, we lose grass because it just bakes in the winter months and gets desiccated and blows away. So trying to soften a few slopes here and there, to especially the south facing slopes, so that we can keep the turf health a little bit better through the winter months and into the spring. Otherwise, that's it. We're not really changing hole lengths or, doing much in the way of rebuilding. We're not showing rebuilding any greens other than the practice greens that we've talked about, because the general consensus was that the greens are pretty good. They're sized right. They have nice contour. They've got lots of variety in hole locations. There weren't really any that were dramatic agronomic problems. So the greens were pretty much leaving where they are and as they are.
Thanks. And one more, you could talk a little more about irrigation. Is it more than drains? Is it new sprinkler, new stuff like that? Just things that might help the staff.
Right. And again, Jeremiah talked about that briefly, but you see the irrigation on the back nine, the old holes on the back nine is basically brand new. It's a year old, year and a half old. It will take another season, probably into this season, before we can get that completely dialed in. It's hard to describe the difference in manageability of the older design systems versus what we can do now. Now Jeremiah can control every single head on the new system from a computer. And he can go out with moisture sensors and get readings and compare this spot to a spot 50 yards away and make fine adjustments of 30 seconds or a minute on the runtime on each individual irrigation head. Well, the old system doesn't have quite that degree of accuracy. So it'll be a matter of updating the heads as we can, starting at around the greens. I mean, the greens and green surrounds are always the number one priority on every golf course. So we start there, and by putting in individual head control and individual heads watering the greens and green surrounds, he can start to adapt that level of control on those holes. But ultimately, there will be a time, probably 10 to 15 more years from now, when that system will need to be replaced or extensively refurbished with new pipe and wire and everything else, just like the west holes were. So it's a work in progress, but you're hitting it right on the head. I mean, the old sayings that I've always heard is the superintendent has to water to his driest spots. So if you have poor irrigation coverage and you've got wet spots and dry spots, well, you have to water your driest spots to keep the turf alive, which makes your wet spots even wetter. So having a good irrigation system that has that kind of dialed in control is absolutely essential to eliminating and reducing the wet areas and getting the drainage where we need it to go.
I'll be to you, Robbie.
Hey, I just had two questions. One on number 7.
Okay?
Are you going to do anything with the left side? I mean, that whole, when you're playing all the way back, there is no bailout. And if you pull it left, there's cart path or dirt or hazard.
Yeah.
There's just nothing over there to kind of save you.
Whoops, I don't know what happened there. Yeah, 7, 8, 9 are the tightest holes on the golf course, and I don't need to tell you guys that. You know that already. Unfortunately, there isn't really that much we can do. What I'm showing here with my graphics is actually mowing down that steep slope and mowing a flat bit of fairway below that green to the right to act as the bailout. Although that, for a good player, that recovery shot's going to be much harder than a lob wedge out of the rough. So those are the kinds of improvements that I love to do, because the high handicappers could putt their ball up that slope, or you could hit a bump shot up that slope. The low handicap golfers get confused, and that's when I win. If I can make the low handicappers think a little bit and try to decide whether they want to putt or chip or nip a wedge, that's when I get in Jeremiah's head and he gets mad at me because he has to think on the golf course. So, but back to more specifically to your question, unfortunately, there really isn't a way. What you see here, if I can zoom in a little bit, the suggestion is that we combine those cart paths. The cart path on 9 and the cart path on 7 get combined. So we do move the cart path. There's the existing cart path. We move it over 10 feet, which every little foot's going to help, but we move it over 10 feet, and then we add the bailout to the right. So we're squeezing as much room out of there as we can.
No, I mean, that's, I think, a good change. That would, any extra spot next to that cart path, just
Right.
at least you have someplace to go. Then my next question I've always brought up on 15
Yeah,
especially with you looking at moving the fairway. Has anybody thought about basically moving that tee box way back and then changing 17's cart path so it goes to the left of the green?
there's two things there, and you know, it'd be worth looking at to not completely dismiss the idea, but you start losing grade quite a bit there. Once you get left of the cart path on 17 down here into these trees, you're 6 or 8 feet lower than this tee box currently sits. So it would take quite a bit of dirt work, but you've got sources of dirt. There's a big pile of dirt right here and another big pile of dirt just south of here that's just off the picture that we could use to do something like that. That would be a pretty extensive change, but with today's equipment and technology, a good change, because that's a very short par 5 by today's standards. The other issue you've got are the massive power lines, where we can only go back so far before those power lines really get into play. With as high as the ball launches nowadays, you can't get very far back before that becomes a problem. So it would be something we would study in more detail and decide, you know, if the cost of moving the dirt is worth the extra yardage, and it would depend. If it's 7 yards, probably not, but if we could get 30 yards, it might be.
All right, cool. Just wanted to know if you
Okay.
looked at that.
Who else? You had your hand up? Yeah.
There's a restroom on the par 3 and a restroom on the back 9, but there's not one on the front. There's porta potties.
Right at the
That's
back
the
of
problem,
6
they're
tees is a
nasty.
restroom, correct? There's a... Yeah. Right there. Oops.
Yeah, we briefly looked at some fabricated buildings for restrooms, and you're looking at $375,000. So obviously it's on our wish list, but not sure of the time frame on that, but we understand.
Did you have another one? Yeah. Oh, hang on.
I just keep looking. What are you doing to 5?
On 5?
Looks like you're.
So, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mention that. One of the other things that we looked at was what we're calling in the industry turf grass reduction. And that's because of where we live and how water is so scarce. There aren't very many areas on this golf course where we can do it. I'll point out the other ones, but this one was one of the large ones where we would look to get rid of the irrigated turf in this area on 5 and convert that to a more drought tolerant, either completely native grass or a mix of native grasses and fine fescues, and just not mow and maintain it so that we can reduce the amount of water that we're using. And there's a couple of other areas too, like I said, I didn't point out. We have one here on the left side of 11 along the fence there. That whole area, what we're showing there is a series of mounds of berm along there to help screen the views off site. But then it would also not be irrigated. It would be fine fescue or something with some trees planted, trying to create a vegetative screen, but also not add irrigated turf. And I think the website has the master plan posted somewhere, right? If it doesn't, it can in the future.
Yeah, it's a work in progress.
So if you're scrolling around when you're looking at it, that's what the lighter colored green areas mean. So we've got one there. We've got the one on 5. That may have been it, wasn't it, Jeremiah? I think. Otherwise, other areas where we have some native and semi-native, we'll look to go in and overseed into those and get a little bit better stand of grass over the coming years. Yes.
Just a comment, but on 7, wasn't that mound on the left of 7 to protect number 9 green from people hitting into that?
I'm sure it was
So-
there, yeah, to help that.
Now that's going to leave that wide open for injuries.
The mound, I think the mound you're talking about is right there, where the cursor is right now. It's back there.
That's not, that doesn't stay there?
Yes, yeah.
So we'll still be.
As much as it is, yes.
How's the point of sale, the new system going in, and will it go live March 1st?
We're very close. I'm still thinking the go live date to move to member sports will be March 1st. It could be delayed maybe a week, week and a half. We just have some internal technical things that we are working on. So more to come on that.
What are, do I have to push? What are the plans for like number 4, about 75 yards to the green? Because it slopes there. Yeah, right between the lake and, right,
There we go. So the only thing on 4 is rebuilding bunkers more or less in place. I think we're eliminating or reducing this bunker back here in the back left a little bit, and then this coloring up here shows there's a pretty weak pine tree that's back there right now, and the goal would be to remove that tree and regrade back here so that right now the runoff water, if it rains, comes right down here and onto the green, and we would regrade back there to keep the water and take it around so that it no longer comes down onto the green. Otherwise, if you're talking about out
Yeah.
here in the landing area, we don't really have anything shown on the
'cause
plans.
it seems there's no grass usually by those 2 bunkers there.
Here,
Right, yeah,
Right there.
right there.
yep, that would be taken care of as part of a bunker renovation.
And if you want to take that.
So we didn't really talk much, and I don't know how much more detail we need to go into on this, but the goal from the outset, numbers wise, anymore, is to try to get your furthest forwardmost tee yardage down in the 4,200 yard range. And in Colorado, especially with our altitude, we're trying to get as long as we can. We just really don't have room to get much length on this golf course, which is okay. But we definitely want to get our forward tee yardage down below 4,400 for sure, which is right about where we are on the plan right now. And I pulled it up, I've got some interesting stats to show you guys that I know there's a lot of women in the audience, and a lot of times they have this question, but up until about 2005, nobody had ever really done an accurate study of how far people hit the golf ball. We all knew from watching the tour players on TV how far they were hitting it, but nobody really did any true analysis. Well, in 2006 and 7, this study was started, and they published their results in 2013 that based the yardages of how far you hit it based on your swing speed in 10-yard increments. And it was very mind-opening, I think, to a lot of golf course architects for sure, because we've been designing golf courses way too long for a long time for a lot of people. So this shows, and I don't know how well you can see it, but for a 65 mile an hour swing speed, which is what a typical female player hits the ball, they're hitting it 120 yards in the air with a driver, and it rolls out to 154. So you think about that, and that means every single par 4 that you play that's over 300 yards is driver 3-wood, and you're lucky to get there in 2. So we've been going way too long for way too long. The other interesting thing, which is why I had this one pulled up to me, is you look at driver, 3-wood, 5-wood, they're all the same. The total distance, because of the difference in trajectory, is all the same. So hopefully the equipment manufacturers can get something figured out there. But you can see we go up then to 75 mile an hour, 85 mile an hour, maybe 95 mile an hour is where your typical male golfer would land. And they're at a 217 carry and a 240 total driver distance. Okay. I sat down with this today and sort of started monkeying around with altitude adjustments and figuring the thing with altitude, which is interesting to me, everybody always talks about 10%, right? 10%. When you go down and play at sea level, you got to add 10%. Well, that's if you're a 95 or 105 mile an hour swing speed person. If you're a 65 mile an hour swing speed person, you're lucky to get 3 or 4%, maybe, because your ball doesn't stay in the air that long to begin with. So it's interesting that our golf courses for the average forward tee player are way too long. Even at, and I can't tell you how many of these types of meetings I've been to where the best women players show up and they're like, we don't want to play from 4,200 yards. That's because they have a huge advantage. If they can get to every par 4 and 2 and 90% of their competition can't, they've got a huge advantage and they want to keep that. So we're trying to make things a little more even for everybody. Right.
I just had a quick question again back on the plan.
Sure.
Were there like manufactured greens on the driving range? Is that what the green blobs in there are showing?
The initial intent would be that they would be real grass, but they would be grassed with a different grass species, probably ryegrass, so that they'll have just enough color difference that they'll pop out and they'll look like real greens. That's always the goal, is to have it be as realistic a practice experience as we can get. The only other little specifics that I'm showing, these two long skinny greens right here are a newer trend that I've seen at a lot of university practice facilities. Arizona State has a great one. Stanford has a great one, but they're called wedge greens, where basically it's one long green that you can see it gets a little bit wider as you get further and further away, and you put a flag about every 8 to 10 yards. And the green then is anywhere from 50 to about 90 or 100 yards out. So you can sit on the tee and hit in 10-yard increments and practice your distance control with your wedge. And the widths are based on tour averages, where, if the flag's in the center at 50 yards, the tour player's trying to be inside of 10 feet. So it's a 20-foot wide green at 50 yards. And it's a 26-foot wide green at 60 yards, and it goes up to about a 40-foot wide green at 90.
That's cool. I would maybe consider putting one in the middle, because if you're on either end of the range, closest to either one of the nets, it might be a little tricky to fire at those. But yeah, that's a really cool concept.
Any other questions, comments?
I saw a picture of 15, the original 15, and it did not have a cart path through the middle of it, which delighted me, because that's generally is my landing zone for my second shot. And I know Jeremiah has been doing a great job trying to mow that area a little bit more, with some feedback from the women's clubs. Was there ever any consideration about not splitting up 15 with that cart path and taking that cart path up one of the sides with maybe some?
Yeah, if you see, I don't know if you can see it.
No,
I can
I didn't
zoom
see
in,
it.
but that's exactly what we've got shown.
Okay, great.
15 serves the tees, and then it cuts across in front of the forward tee and goes up the left side.
Oh, there it
the
is.
whole way.
Okay, that's absolutely perfect.
So,
There's no room back there to hit a shot.
Yeah, love it. Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, those are the kinds of things that we would study even more in the detailed design phase before anything was implemented. But your point is exactly right. When the course was originally built, it was only green to tee cart paths because of budget more than anything. But over the years, cart paths have been added for everything we talked about, more speed of play and durability in bad weather and all that kind of stuff. So. Any other questions? This has been great. Again, I'll hang out afterwards. If people don't want to ask a question to the entire group, you're welcome to come on up and we'll hang out and talk as long as we want to. Yep, that's goal number one for sure.
Well, we appreciate your time tonight. Please share that QR code with everyone. That's where we're going to be making our updates and notifications and progress and pictures and things like that. You'll originally see right now we have kind of what our projected 2025 projects are. Obviously, finances have to be in line with that, and just as I think everyone understands, the golf course is an enterprise fund, so we do not get any assistance from the general fund with the city of Englewood. So everything that we make is what we need to take care of all these projects. So we're very excited that golf is in a great place that we can start investing back into our course. So thank you very much.